Again, thank you for that moment of silence. We're glad you're here. Welcome to alumni and friends and students joining us today. Our students are joining us in the Olney Collection Room. And I want to say to our dear students, I want to thank you so much for attending tonight's presentation. Please know that these programs since the beginning have been for you. Although we hope they also strengthen the school's connection with our alumni and friends, you are the primarily intended beneficiaries of the knowledge and experience these speakers have been sharing with us. Our school has a long tradition of guest speakers and programs that local alumni and families were invited to attend in person. You are our alumni of the future, and we hope that one day some of you will return to share the wisdom you will have gained with tomorrow's Olney students. Okay, so Christian, would you like to say a few words and before we introduce our speaker tonight?
Sure. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. My voice isn't the best today, but certainly I have to say a few things to welcome Lian Zeitz. Those of you who are here with us in October 2018 may remember that Lian's father, Paul Zeitz, presented in the meeting house right on that homecoming weekend in 2018. So we are glad that Lian is with us, and certainly they are cut from the same cloth, or as his father always says, Lian is a much better version of himself. I've known Lian for a decade now. He's moved from being my student to being a good friend, and certainly someone from whom I draw inspiration about mental health and other development issues. He just has a way of being optimistic and infecting everyone with that optimism. A word to the students about the lecture series. Actually, I'm glad to see Judy Hale here. Again, around October, November 2018, we went to Pittsburgh, met with Judy Hale, and she said, one of the things I loved as a student was the speaker series. People were so awesome who would come talk with us. And she said, as a teenager, I hated it. But after I left Olney, I realized, wow, what a great opportunity that I had these kinds of people come speak at Olney. So students, while it may seem as a drag right now, we hope you'll get some gems from these talks, and that at one point you will also give these kinds of talks to similar teenage audiences that may be inspired by what you say. So without much ado, I would like to invite Lian Zeitz to start off. Lian, welcome, and we look forward to seeing you on the Olney campus at some point in the near future.
Thank you so much, Anne and Christian. If you haven't already, I think this presentation will be easiest if you pin my video so it's the biggest that it possibly can be on the screen. I'm going to be talking with some information. There will be mainly pictures, but if you haven't already, it will help with the session. First, I just have to extend my thanks for having me following my dad's presentation last year and my own connection to Christian and your school, and personally having been through boarding school myself, just the opportunity to come and speak to other people that are having that shared experience means a lot to me. I know it is Friday night, so I'm going to try to keep this as engaging and non-technically intense as possible, and hope to be able to share in a conversation with you about something that I think we're all connected to, which is our mental health and well-being. And I'm very interested to hear what people's thoughts and ideas are themselves as we go through the presentation. To start though, before I share a little bit more about myself, I, like many people, have been having a very tough time these last couple of years amidst the pandemic. My own sense of isolation, the way my friends are interacting in the world right now, and my family's inability to be together has just been challenging. And I just want to express that I imagine it's challenging for everybody who's on this call. And one of the practices that I try to do whenever I come together with anybody is something called a loving kindness practice. And it's just taking a quick moment to build a sense of love and care in our hearts, and then extend it to anybody in the world that we feel needs it. And why this is important is because there's so much suffering and grief and challenge going on right now, that we can also address that in ourselves and externally by doing practices like this. So before I get too deep into who I am, if you are just finishing up a day of school and I can see a bunch of students, and if you're on the screen, first, let's just, everybody, if you can just give yourself a hug, a end of the week, Friday hug. I can see if you're doing it or not. Even stretch and move your neck and your arm. Let you know that you exist, you're here. And from that place of self-care, just take a moment and you can close your eyes, and I invite you to just visualize somebody in the world that you're sending that to. Bring them into your focus, and we'll just take a quick second to do that. Okay, thank you. And just, I'll tell you shortly in a little bit more about me, but I've never met most of you, and the moment to come together to share in love and compassion is immensely valuable in these times. So a little bit about me, and thank you for engaging in that practice. As I said before, I went to boarding school, so I'm gonna start probably at my adolescence, because it's where my story really begins. I, like many young people, was intellectually curious, hyperactive, quite a nuisance in school, and I at times really struggled in the classroom. One of the main issues for me is that I found that my mind just worked differently, and all through elementary and high school, I was trying twice as hard to do the same things that my friends were getting. And one assignment would take me 4 hours when it would take my friend 1 hour. And it just like boiled inside me at the beginning, this sense that I was inadequate or I was different. And as I went through middle school and into high school, what often happens is that the level of academic rigor invites students to a greater level of challenge. And most of the time, that opportunity is really welcomed and exciting. For me, it was an academic crash. And when I entered into ninth grade, I really hit a peak of depression and a lack of self-worth. I was doing drugs and skipping school. And it was a point in my life where, even amidst many privileges that I experienced, I had lost touch with who I was and what I valued. And what often happens is when we disconnect from school, or when we feel like we're not going to succeed in school, we're often told when we're young that that's a validation of who we're going to be in our lives. So if I wasn't going to make it in school, I wasn't going to make it in the real world. And that ultimately led me into a series of therapeutic and transitional therapeutic programs across the US. And I had a pretty underwhelming experience in the like 2008 to 2010, going in and out of these different sorts of therapeutic treatment programs. And what I experienced was a model of mental health care where a lot is done upon you without anything being asked of you. So I was in treatment often and was never really asked, what do I value? What do I think my care should look like? Do I even think this is working for me? And it made me quite bitter about my whole experience. And from the privileged position that I had in the world, I had options. And a number of my friends and colleagues, they didn't have those options. And so the route to get any sort of mental health support pretty much ended. What I then found after that experience was that a lot of times in traditional mental health care and support, young people aren't actually asked questions, and they're not actually invited to be the stewards of their own care. And as I realized this more and more, I got fascinated with this concept of what's happening with mental health across the world. What does it look like in other cultures and places, and how are they addressing mental health? I was fortunate to have a humanities education in college where I looked into literature and explored the role of literature in explaining human experiences. But what I ultimately found when I went in that inquiry is that all over the world, nobody was doing mental health very well. Yet it's this issue that we're all deeply connected with. And I had experienced it myself and my family and my friend group. And it was just, I would say, jarring to me that something so widespread is talked about so little. And not only that, when it comes time to address an issue, the solutions are very limited or not accessible to the people that need them. And so this was kind of rocking to me because as I became equipped with ideas around social justice or environmental justice or racial justice, I realized that without mental health, without this cross-cutting dimension of our well-being, how are we to actually address all of these other cross-cutting issues in the world? How are we going to support young people to get the educations they need? How are we going to support people to make climate smart decisions if we're not tending to this core aspect of our human experience, which is our mental wealth and well-being? And this really took me on an interesting journey where when I was 19, I got hired to visit and evaluate therapeutic treatment centers across the US from the perspective of a young person. And what was important about this is that I would go into these treatment facilities and I would ask questions to the young people, such as, do you feel that staff want to be here? Have you ever been asked what you think your care should be? And a lot of times these questions unearth the value and the ethics of what was actually going on in these places, whether they were giving evidence-based care or not, whether the young people were being heard or seen and involved in their own care. That was a realization to me. And it also told me that I had a role to play in this space, that I had a unique lived experience of being through a certain type of therapeutic system that made me innately valuable. And for someone who really struggled with academics all through high school and into college, I was unsure if I was going to be like an academic person. It was very interesting that I really came into my own power when I found the value in my own experience and the ability to advocate for myself externally. What was quite interesting about that is that mental health was a very spiritual process for me. It wasn't that I went and got the best behavioral health care or I saw the right therapist. It's that I was able to connect with meaning and purpose and values in my life and people in my life that fed my soul and that helped keep me going. And I think one of the things that I think is often misunderstood about mental health is that it isn't just the dimension of mental illness that you think of when it's somebody that needs acute care. Mental health happens across a spectrum from mental wellness to mental illness. And we all go through phases in our life along that spectrum. And one of the things that I had to become okay with was that my mental health experiences were not permanent. They were a phase on my grand journey in life where I encounter at different times. And so that ultimately led me into a space of thinking about how to support young people and their mental health internationally and around the world, primarily with the idea that young people need to be involved at every step of the way in the design, delivery, and evaluation of any mental health program that's aiming to serve them. And what I found was that the majority of mental health interventions that were developed around the world didn't often have young people at the heart of designing them, particularly technologically advanced, socially connected young people that we find today. Many were developed a long time ago in North America and were being exported to different parts of the world for delivery to young people. And so this was really actually a fascinating experience for me, because in 2016, when I was entering into the mental health workforce, it was very uncommon to see young people as equal partners in the design of a solution. What was often happening was that young people would be invited in for a consultation, or they would be the tokenized group of young people at a conference who were really just there as kind of a showcase to say that young people were involved. But really, young people weren't being meaningfully connected to the processes that go into designing solutions for them. And that was really something that I had set out to change, and many others had set out to change. And one of the things that I think we found was that young people have the creativity, the innovative solutions, the personal lived experience, and the values that lead to better mental health programming. And when people talk or ask, what is the pathway to get solutions for youth mental health? I often say that it starts by asking young people and involving them in every step of the way. And some of the challenges to that are that young people see things intersectionally and often from a social justice lens. So what that means is that they're really ready to challenge the systems that be and confront forces of oppression, disconnection, and hurt that often many systems currently operate under. And I just want to say that in all of the spaces that I see young people operating, they're going against a lot of forces of stagnancy and not innovative practice. And one of the things that I found personally was that it's very important for adults, so the adults in the room who are listening, to actually work on their own mindset shift of young people being recipients to being active partners. And conceptually, it can be a very hard thing to grapple with, because we're often trying to serve young people in creative ways. But any young person you ask knows when they're being treated and respected and heard versus when something's being done onto them. And I just have to say that it can be demonstrated, and adults are a key part of the solution. It's not only about young people. One of the other things that I just wanted to say about mental health is that, particularly the mental health of young people, is that 90% of all scientific papers that have been conducted on adolescent health have been from North America and Europe. So the large evidence base around what to do for young people when there is an issue has a very North American, Western centric evidence base of the practices to go about doing that. What that means is that we're finding a lot of the historically relevant practices, when they're adapted and looked at in other contexts and cultures, aren't fitting. And there's a whole movement to ensure that young people all across the world are a part of designing interventions and solutions that are culturally and contextually relevant for them in their settings where they are. And one of the big pieces of work that I've been a part of is advocating for new research that young people participate in to ensure that whatever we design in the future is actually supported by and led by young people, so we don't make the same mistakes we have in the past. And I've advocated for this at national and international levels to ensure that people in decisions build it into policy and funding practices that young people have to be at the table. And so one of the projects that I have been a part of creating, which I want to share with you, is called Cities Rise. So I was a founding team member to this organization that's based in New York back in 2015. And our mission was to address the intersection of youth mental health and rapid urbanization that's taking place across the world. By 2050, 60% of all young people on Earth are going to live in urban settings. And we know that urban settings are a hotbed for the intersection of a range of mental health challenges within education, transportation, justice, and the built environment. And so one of the questions we were tackling was, how do we take a citywide approach to mental health? to not just think about mental health as an isolated sector silo, but as something that is cross-cutting across all dimensions of life. And the importance of this is that because mental health is so intimately connected to our daily lives, it's not like physical health where we can just go to see, the hospital and get a cast. It's something that plays out ongoing, and it means that the systems that we're a part of and the spaces that we're in have to respect and support our mental health rather than hurt it. One of the most exciting things about these projects was that we had young people directly involved in creating interventions. And I was fortunate to help create a multi-million-dollar grant that gave youth-led projects direct funding to build their own ideas of how they should address mental health. And one of the cool things about this grant opportunity was that we didn't say that we needed things to be evidence-based. We said that we needed them to be youth-led, youth-informed, and evidence-informed. And what this meant was we were saying, young people, we hope you can draw from the evidence that exists, but we recognize that the current information that's out there is absolutely inadequate. And so we want you to take initiative in telling us and creating pathways for better mental well-being. So here are just a few examples of what the projects were that young people around the world were figuring out. So amidst the pandemic, young people were creating virtual buddy groups that they were offsetting the physical connection that they were lacking with facilitated social connection online. And so this looked like weekly and bi-weekly groups that young people got together, they played games, they did charades, they offset the loss of friendship that they were experiencing from the pandemic and made something creative out of it. Another was this Arts for Wellbeing project that young people worked with parents around the world to build art kits for parents to go through with their children to practice wellness and well-being. And so it was a youth designed kit for parents to practice art with their children. And why this is innovative is because the connection for parents in doing art with their children and that cultivating wellness isn't always shared. So creating a package that any parent everywhere could use to deploy arts-based practices with their kids to support well-being, and that being designed by young people, was quite a powerful concept. The next is virtual wellness pop-ups in cities around the world. And these use things like art, hip hop, dance, meditation, theater to have hard to reach and hard to have conversations around mental health. One of the things that we find is that young people are much more amicable to the creative arts and expression rather than simply using words and language to communicate about their mental health and well-being. And so we often invite and promote the use of arts and creative expression as a tool to create those hard conversations around a heavily stigmatized issue. One of the other is called Caring Conversations. And this was a series of text messages that were sent to young people once a week that expressed care and concern for how they were doing. And what we found was that when young people were just simply receiving a message that was caring and considerate of where they were in the world, they were reporting improvements in how they were feeling about themselves and their motivation to go about in their days. This program is now being rolled out at universities across the US to support students who may be at further risk of suicidal ideation, self-harm, depression, or even simply social isolation. And then the last is mental health first aid. So one thing that people often don't know about is that just like physical first aid that you can go and get a certification, there's a certification that exists for mental health, and it's called mental health first aid. And what that teaches is a basic introductory way of what do you do in a crisis around mental health? How do you differentiate between different types of mental health problems? And what is the stepwise process you take when you encounter someone in crisis? And I often promote young people to go and get what's called youth mental health first aid, which is just like physical health first aid, but it's a budding movement of things that all come together to say that mental health is equally important as physical health, and we want to be advocating for that wherever we are. Another project that's slightly different that I worked on is called My Mind, Our Humanity. And this is a coalition of young leaders from multiple countries around the world: Rwanda, Ghana, Kenya, India, Brazil, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, South Africa. And we're a group of about 25 youth leaders. So we're all under 30 years old. We're all people with lived experience. And we've come together to create a different face of how mental health can look for young people, because we so often found that mental health websites and information sites were often very dark and blue and weren't very compelling or lively or inviting for young people to go and access information. And so we've set off on a mission to reduce stigma and promote the view that mental health is a fundamental part of being human, to integrate the voices and experiences of young people into public debate, research, mental health practice, and policymaking, and to educate and inspire young people to action and to promote well-being in their communities. And so over the years, we've been able to garner almost 30,000 Instagram followers and run a number of international campaigns in 5 languages that were designed by and led by young people to promote mental well-being. And why this is important is because we found that when the messages were designed and developed by young people, they resonated with the youth cohorts that they were trying to reach. And we were able to touch on subject matter that often is hard to grapple with. One of the things that I think is especially important about this is that, as you can see in these photos, we were inviting artists and young people to create imagery and multimedia campaigns that painted a picture of mental health that isn't the isolated person always kind of alone, that we can experience mental health in our daily lives, in our school, in our families, and it's actually navigating that and building healthy coping strategies for when we come up to life stressors to be able to go about that. One of the things that's particularly important right now to young people is that there's a very Eurocentric view of what it means to have mental health and how to address mental health. And one of the things that we're working on is creating an open and inclusive space for diverse worldviews and practices of what it means to be mentally well, to be permissible, accepted, and found in mainstream practices. And one of the things that we always call for is that in many languages and cultures around the world, there isn't the same language around mental health that we have. And it's not a practice of forcing our understanding on mental health to another. It's actually about welcoming and inviting a more creative process where we work together to find the nuances in our own cultures and our own values and build systems and programs that respond to that adequately. And some of the things that I find when working with young people internationally is that in the United States, we often teach a rugged sense of individualism. And in other places, that sense of individualism isn't cultivated as strong. And so it's oftentimes that I'll actually work in a group setting and focus on where the community is and how young people feel a part of a whole, rather than saying, let's unpack all of your personal mental struggles right now and talk about you. And I think this is important because we can all find creative and new ways to engage young people in thoughtful and supportive ways. And I think one of the experiences that I found and what many young people find is that the extra effort to think of new, creative, and diverse ways of engagement isn't always done. And so I just invite any young people wanting to work in mental health or any adults that are supporting the mental health of their students to be bold in finding creative pathways outside of the normal system for addressing mental health. So to take a quick step back, I've had the opportunity to meet with young people internationally and ask them questions around when mental health comes up, what's most important to you? And most of the time, young people will say, I want the skills to be able to help my friend who's struggling. I see that my friend's been having a tough time and I want to know, what I say, what I do, how to help them. And, this is a very complex question and there's all layers to it. But the thing that I generally tell people first is that when someone is sick, in distress, or mentally unwell, those first caregiving moments can be some of the most important for them seeking further help in the future. So when someone goes to their friend and if they're met with resistance or harshness or something called toxic positivity, they often take way longer to go get help again. And so we always want to make those encounters when we're engaging with somebody who may be struggling as positive and loving as we possibly can. One of the data points that's so important that I hope everybody can learn about from this is that the delay between the onset of a mental health problem and somebody actually seeking care in the United States is 11 years. So normally someone develops a problem and it's not till 11 years later, in the best cases, that they seek any care at all. In most parts of the world, people don't get any help at all for their mental health challenges, 0. And so that's like literally saying we treat stage 4 cancer 10 years too late for an issue that so many people are encountering. And so one of the things that I think is super important is something called expressing solidarity. So I'm just gonna share a contemplative tool with all of you for any time that you may be encountering a friend or a loved one that you think they're actually coming to you because they want to express distress or challenge. So one of the things that we can do is imagine that we're welcoming somebody into our home and we're so happy that they're here to join us. And we express graciousness for coming into our space as if we were so ecstatic that they're a guest in our home. And simply saying, welcome, thank you for being here with me. I'm so happy that you get to be chatting with me and I'm here for you. Simply doing that automatically creates a shift in someone's head that whatever they're going through, they're welcome here. And it's okay for them to be there with you and share. One of the things that often happens when people are expressing distress is they receive things like, suck it up, try harder. Hey, I don't think that's really what's going on for you. Let's not talk about it. Or, oh, did you see the sports results? What's going on for you is not important. And so one of the ways to work on that goodness muscle that we all have, that inner compassion, is by imagining that we're welcoming somebody into our home and just simply saying, I'm here for you. And using tools and you can say things like, I know you've gone through hard things before, and I believe you can go through this now, rather than saying, this sucks, get over it, or different things like that. And why this is simply important is because, as I said, we want to ensure that that gap between somebody getting help is not 11 years. But what often happens is so many people who go to express help are met with such toxic energy and a non-welcoming mentality that they don't get help at all. And so what I invite everybody to do is find those moments in your life to offset that trajectory and to be creative about how to do that. The next thing that I want to share with you before we get into some open questions is a self-care technique that I teach people who experience anxiety or who need to self-soothe in times of extreme stress. One of the greatest, I think, advancements in modern science is the understanding of how our brains work and understanding our fight, flight, and freeze mechanism in our sympathetic nervous system that happens when we encounter stress. And so one of the amazing tools that was developed for hurricane survivors and people that really have gone through extreme natural disasters was a therapeutic technique called EMDR, which is called eye movement desensitization therapy. We're not doing that and going through that whole thing. But one of the most fascinating techniques that's available to all of us at any time that was developed was called the butterfly hug. And the way the butterfly hug works is that it's a tool for activating communication between the left and right sides of our brain when we enter fight, flight, or freeze mode. And when we go into fight, flight, or freeze, what's happening when we're like, if anybody imagines an anxiety attack where someone's hyperventilating or really stressed and they can't focus and they're single track minded, one of the things that's going on is that the communication between the circuits in our brain is getting held up because our body is saying survive, survive, survive. And so when we get into that space, we actually, our executive functioning slows down, our heart rate heightens, and we become less equipped to make good decisions. So if you all could do this with me, for the people I can see on the screen, I'll do it. But the way it works is you cross one arm over the other like this. And you just start by tapping, right, left, at a slow pace, a light tap that's just easeful. And when you do this tap, once you get into it, you add a slight mantra that says, I am okay. I am okay. I am okay. And if you want to say it with me, you can. I am okay. I am okay. I am okay. And you can honestly just feel when you do it that it soothes you down. It really activates your sympathetic nervous system and tells you that you're safe. I honestly have had some bad anxiety over the last year, and I've pulled this out of myself, and it like worked wonders. It's not an end-all, save-all solution or in anything like that, but I firmly believe that we just need to all have tools in our toolbox at all times of day to deploy when we're struggling or somebody else is struggling. And this is just one simple activity that you can do for yourselves in times of heightened stress. And so with that, I really appreciate you listening to my all over the place presentation. I hope it wasn't too boring on a Friday evening. And I would be really interested to have a conversation around mental health and hear anybody's questions or comments. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Lian. Always amazing. And now we'll start taking questions. You can either raise your hand or just unmute and speak. Yes, Faith? We'll take 2 or 3 questions in a row.
Hello, my name's Faith. I'm a sophomore here at ONI, and I was wondering if you have experienced more mental health issues with kids in more of an isolated place in the US.
All right, thank you very much, Faith. We'll take Summer next.
Hi, my name's Summer. I am, oh, sorry. Dang it.
We can hear you, Summer.
All right. Hi, my name's Summer. I am a junior and it is my 3rd year here at ONI. And my question is, what is a way that you think we could get the topic of mental health around more than it is right now?
All right, thank you very much, Summer. And then one more from Golden.
Yeah, you said that it was 11 years in between the time that someone has a problem and they get help for that problem. how would you tell when is a good time to get help?
All right, thank you. So Lian, we'll turn it over to you to answer those first three, then we'll take the next three.
Well, thank you all for those wonderful questions. So Faith's question, I think, was first, which is, am I seeing mental health issues in young people that are in isolating places? And Faith, one quick question. Were you asking about isolation caused by the pandemic or young people living in rural areas that are not urban?
Rural areas.
Yeah. So interestingly, the spread of mental health challenges amongst young people is pretty even at 1 in every 5 young people is experiencing some sort of mental health challenge at some point in their adolescence all around the world. And so what we find is that the types of challenges that are encountered by young people in rural areas often are not always the same as young people that are encountered in rural environments. And what we do know, and what I could share with you, is that access to services and appropriate type of support in rural settings is much less. So the young people that are in those settings often have an extra effort of getting the right type of care from the people that they needed, which can lead to increased challenges. I'll go to the next one, which is Summer's question. I love this question. What is the way to get mental health more than it is? One thing I often echo to people is to see that mental health is a cross-cutting issue that is intimately connected to every facet of human life and social challenge. And so when we talk about social justice, we have to talk about mental health. When we talk about the environment, we have to talk about mental health. And so one of the things that I practice is, whenever I can, making those sort of intersecting connections that show that it's not some isolated taboo thing that needs to be reserved to a corner of the room. The other thing that I think is important is just breaking any shame we feel about talking about a natural human experience. We're coming out of a world, and our parents and the adults in our lives, they didn't talk about mental health. They didn't have the awarenesses that we now have in the ways we do. And in many families, they're not willing to talk about it. And so I think for us, it's really about talking about it and not allowing that pattern of silence to continue into the next generation. I'm trying to answer these kind of fast. And then Golden, how would you tell when is a good time to get help? So I think there's two things that I would just say here. One is that the message that I would want to share with you is about prevention, promotion, and early action. So the interesting thing about that statistic about 11 years, and people not getting help, the other interesting statistic is that 75% of all mental health conditions that exist begin to manifest by the age of 24. So anybody who's experiencing a mental health challenge in the world, the early symptoms of what they're experiencing, even if it's adults, likely began to manifest before they were 24 years old. And so that what we often say is that when we can build coping skills earlier and prevent problems from getting debilitating later in life, then we can often avoid the need to go through such acute and intense care. That said, in the cases where people do need help, I normally ask, is their ability to live a well and healthy life and the way that they're managing it working? And do they feel it is or it isn't? And if somebody doesn't feel the way that they're managing life's challenges is working for them, that's a great place to get help. And what we often tell people is that we never want to wait to the point where we could have said something earlier and we didn't just invite somebody to get care or support in ways that they could have prevented the more debilitating, severe challenges that come when we don't say anything at all. And so one of the things that I think that I always gauge when I have friends who are struggling or things like that is that, you know, do I think that the spiral that they're on, are they going to snap out of it? Or is it very clear that they're so debilitated and unable to do the things that they would normally do, that if we were to intervene earlier in a way that worked for them, they might not have to crash? Because we all go through waves of challenges in our life. But what becomes so hard is that when people hit a boiling point and it's been unaddressed for so long, it becomes a much more reactive response than a preventative response, if that makes sense. And so we're always just trying to prevent these things rather than react to them, if that makes sense. I see a few more hands and I hope that was helpful.
Great, thank you very much, Lian. And I'll invite Michael and Fatima to please ask the question you put in the chat.
Yes, hi, good evening, everyone. Well, first of all, it's a great topic, Lian. And you mentioned that you'd noticed that when youth are given options, they tend to move towards visual arts or maybe also performing arts. But I guess in addition to that, what other element did you see that either the youth requested, I guess, or that maybe was trying to be implemented that was particular to youth versus maybe adult mental health treatment areas?
All right, thank you very much. Michael, are there two more so that Leah can answer three in a go? All right, I see Kiddos. How about you ask next, Kiddos?
So we have three questions here, and then okay. My name is Gadus, and I'm a junior. And my question is mental health a right or a privilege to have? And if it's a right, like how can we exercise that right more? Okay, to the next question.
Okay, I'm Fikr and I'm a sophomore. My question is, like, how do you think like the attitude towards mental health can change in third world countries? Okay, the third question, Mike.
Oi. Okay, I'm Mike. I'm a senior, and my question is, how does atmosphere affect the people's mental health? And if we have like this situation, how to deal with this? And Julian.
All right, you have four questions, Lian. We'll take those four first. Then if Julian wants to ask one, he can come on soon. Julian, do you want to ask a question?
Yeah, no, not actually. No, that's it. That's it.
Well, I have to say wonderful questions. Not surprised from you all, but so I think, so the first question is, what were some of the other issues and elements for youth mental health programming outside of the arts? So some of the elements were youth to youth services themselves. So young people often experience an unhealthy power dynamic when integrating with adults, and components of peer support and peer-led work where the playing field was more balanced. Young people, it wasn't the whole piece of the therapeutic puzzle, of course, but one of the core dimensions that had been missing in youth programming was peer-to-peer mentoring and activation in ways that young people could support each other. Another was that when I was saying that young people understand mental health intersectionally, it means that they also expect the service provisions to understand, for example, the layers between mental health and LGBTQ issues, or the layers between mental health and racism, or the layers between colonization and mental health, for instance. Young people are wanting providers and the people that work with them to be attuned to these intimate layers of their experience that traditional education does not teach psychologists and counselors. And so what young people often find is that they're engaged in services that are misaligned with how they view and see the world. And so the goal is to really get that back into alignment. The other thing is that young people love to learn and create with each other. So when we were able to connect young people from Kenya with the US and Colombia, and they were able to share creative ideas about what they were doing, it was just magic. And so I really just support healing environments that create connection. And in the world that we have, that's just the goal, I think, is to foster more interconnection. The next question, which is a solid question in and of itself, is mental health a right or a privilege? All right, I'm gonna not over jargonize this. Mental health should absolutely be advocated as a right that everybody has access to. That said, what mental health means should not be owned or dominated by a specific group of people that designate this is what mental health means for the world. And so when I say that, I think that as much as mental health is a right, we should always be wary of whose mental health and what type of mental health we're saying is the right. And then in terms of mental health being a privilege, yeah, it is an absolute privilege in many times in many places of the world. Sometimes, you know, we get into the question of when you're fending for food, shelter, survival, and feeding your children, how do you tend to your mental health? That's been actually a faulty logic. And we actually see that when we tend to our mental health and our mental health's always actively engaged, even in moments of scarcity, that we can actually help build tools for people to manage the dire situations that they're often in with more skill, with more self-care, and with more capacity to care for others amidst immense challenges. The next question was mental health in third world countries. So I think there's two things here. One is that in many countries of the world, there's little to no mental health infrastructure at all. There's very little government spending. And in many, what you note as third world countries, there's about one psychiatrist or psychologist per million people at best. And so what that tells us is that no way is this system that we've developed in North America and Europe, where there's a formal mental health infrastructure with trained professionals that everybody goes to, as the outlet. What's happening is what is called community-based mental health practice, and the training of people in communities to be able to address the front lines of mental health challenges that they're experiencing. And one of the opportunities in places that are less advanced in their mental health system is that they don't have to make all of the mistakes that we've made over here in the US and brutally alienate many people to mental health. There's an opportunity, I think, in many parts of the world to grow and to build culture and arts and mental health as a core facet of the development of those places in ways that can make it ingrained as a core facet of society. We're now having in the US to deconstruct a system that was built that didn't work and recreate something new. And so I see a huge opportunity in places to actually build something better. That said, in many places of the world, mental health is not talked about. It's heavily stigmatized. And one of the biggest barriers that people say is addressing the stigma that exists. And my point to that is that stigma is a process of re-emerging our own cultural and personal understandings of mental health and building it into our communities. So what I say, and when I work in other places, I really invite people to be creative about what does mental health mean to them and how do they build that as part of their community and their culture, rather than saying we want the mental health that they have in North America. And so I think by having that awareness and creating agency in the process, that groups can do a lot with mental health, especially in low resources. How does atmosphere affect mental health? So I think this is a nature versus nurture question around how does our environment affect our mental health versus how does like our genetics and what we were born with. we know that the environmental determinants of health, such as the spaces we're in, whether it's pollution we're exposed to, the light in a classroom, the way we enter a train, all of that has an immense impact on our mental health. And by curating our spaces and thinking about the environments that we're in, it can actually lead to improved mental health. So I'll just say to that, that it is a critical thing to think about. And in the world of mental health, we call it environmental determinants. So it's things around us that impact what's going on inside.
Excellent. Thank you, Lian. We are now going to take the last 4 questions. We'll start with Rabia, then we'll go to Marisa, then we'll go to Amy, and then we'll end with Muse. So Rabia first, please make the question short because we have 4 minutes.
Okay, I'm Rabia, I'm freshman. I had a question that, do you think the students who are far away from home have more mental health problems than the students who are with their families?
Thanks, Rabia. Yes, Marisa? Okay, we'll go to Amy while we wait for Marisa to get to a laptop with a microphone.
Hi, first I wanted to say that your presentation was amazing and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I have high functioning anxiety, so I can understand a lot of this. I'm wondering though, for us old folks, how do we reach a teen or preteen who's not very open with sharing their emotions in the first place? Like if we ask them, hey, how's your day going? Is everything okay? And we get meh, and they don't say anything else. So how do we approach that?
Thank you, Amy. Yes, Marisa, are you there? Okay, Muse.
Hi everyone, my name is Musa and I'm a graduating class of 2021 only. And my question is, like, mental illnesses don't exhibit signs until they become serious or triggered, and often the signs are missed or not diagnosed properly. And I believe mental illness is not easily identifiable in early stages. And my question is, so how can we identify mental illness in early stages in ourselves or others and encourage us or others to approach people without being afraid of the stigma before it becomes worse? And in Ethiopia, where I'm from, mental illness isn't addressed well unless they are victims of some sort, because people are so integrated. So how can we recognize or address mental illness in a communicative environments like Ethiopia?
Okay, thank you very much, Muse. Marisa, are you ready? All right, so Kiddos, Fikir, and Muse, you'll probably like to know that Lian has met and talked with Tedros Ghebreyesus, who is the Director General of the World Health Organization. He's from Ethiopia, so you may have some things to share there, as well as the UN Secretary General. So Lian has done some high global level work and also some community work, which brings balance to his career. Okay, Marisa, going a final time. I hope you found a laptop with a mic. All right, Lian, please answer these ones since we are running out of time, and then maybe Marisa can write you through Anne-Marie.
I just want to say that all the students, I am a unconditional resource for you if this is an area that you hope to work in or want connections or want to talk further. I'm really passionate about young people who care about these issues and want to find creative ways. So I just want to say that my door and email and contact are always open to you. So the first question, Rabia, do I think students that are far away from their families have greater challenges with mental health than students that are with their families? Social connection and family matters a lot in our adolescence. And as someone who was in boarding school and away from my family and experienced mental health challenges, I would have to say that it is always hard to be away from your family, and it can lead us into mental health challenges. I don't think, though, that young people who are away from their families necessarily experience more or worse mental health challenges than those who are with their families. And to be completely honest, many young people around the world do not live in healthy family environments where the family is conducive to positive mental health. So it's a challenging question at that to say if or that. But what I will say is that it is really hard being a young person away from your family, and feelings of loss of connection and time can lead us to feel down. And if you're a young person in a boarding school, my experience has been when you're out of boarding school, you can really get a lot of time to reclaim with your family, and it's not lost, but it can be hard. The next is Amy. How do old folks reach a teen or preteen about sharing their emotions when they ask? That's a great question. Well, one is like, are you the right person to be asking that young person that question and expecting a fruitful result? So sometimes I inquire if young adults can collaborate with peers and other adults in their lives to be the right person that they'll open up to. The second is that young people can shut down when they're put on the spot by authority to express themselves. And so we often want to find creative ways of expression that don't rely on the dialectic power dynamic that happens between an adult and a kid. So some of the tools that I use in different spaces are color boards that ask a young person to touch or point on a spectrum about where they're feeling, and then to explain why they touched that area or why they chose that color, or to explain their emotions in what's going on in their body. So asking them to just practice a bit of mindfulness and saying, you know, can you tell me where it hurts inside? Or is there anything happening in your body, you know, about your sadness right now? And so, or inviting them to journal about it. So sometimes I know young people being put on the spot to talk about their feelings, it can lead to a shutdown. And so saying, hey, could we actually take 10 minutes to just free write about what our feelings are? And then if they want to share or not after, they can. But I would just say that if it doesn't happen in that verbal dialectic, creative pathways that may be more welcoming to neurodiverse students, which I think you all heard about in the last presentation, are good ways to go. And then the last question, mental illness signs misdiagnosed. How do we know before it comes work? Well, the one thing I want to reiterate is that our mental health is a spectrum, and that we all at different times in our life touch that illness dimension and that wellness dimension. And so one of the issues is that mental health is often seen as something that's put in a box that we diagnose, and it becomes an ultimatum. So if I'm mentally ill, I have mental illness for the rest of my life, or that mentally ill person is sick and mentally ill. We always have to recognize that that occurs on a spectrum of wellness that we all kind of go through throughout time. What happens is that we often leave it in our communities to, as you said, the crisis or the acute problem until anything is done at all. And in communities that communicate in the ways that you have, that have shared communal values, it, I think, is igniting that piece of the community that really wants to tend and care for itself, and bringing in dimensions of how mental health leads to it. You have to dissociate it from often the crazy person in the village who was chained up. And in many countries, that's the image that comes to people's head when they think of mental health. The homeless guy who's always yelling and screaming or things like that, rather than saying, this is something I experience in my day-to-day life. It's something that you experience, and it's something that we all experience. And so taking it out of the view of being an isolated person in society to saying it's something that's about all of us is a good place to start. I see one last question. What resources would you recommend for young adults struggling with mental illness related to gender and gender dysmorphia? I think this is a great question, and I can follow up with Anne Marie on some great resources that I'll pass on to you.
All right, thank you so very much, Lian, for joining us. And as I said, please feel free at some point to come visit us on campus. We'll be happy to welcome you and have more interaction between you and our community when the time is right. And on this point, friends, I thank you for joining us tonight. Leonard, I hope you picked up some pointers on talking about feelings and others. So thank you very much, students, for all the wonderful questions and for all of our friends for showing up tonight. I wish you a wonderful weekend. Thanks again, Lian. Good night, everyone. Bye-bye.